this agent wants to speak to you. He's gonna have you step out, okay?
Mata, y es la que tiene la guerra con la policía, la que está matando a la policía.
This is what the MS-13 gang leaves on the streets of El Salvador. The country is a never-ending crime scene thanks to gang violence. The MS-13 is one of the bloodiest, most brutal criminal organizations in the world. Now, one of their leaders was caught after ordering mass murders from Ohio.
As we have reported, this man, Edenlinson Velasquez Larin, is locked up in Toledo tonight.
The infamous MS-13 operates from the United States as well as Central America. But how did its leaders make their way into the States? What makes them so bloody? And why was Edenilson Larin arrested in June 2023? We'll explore these questions and many more in today's video. But before we go on, I must warn you, graphic details ahead. To get to the bottom of today's story, we have to go back a few decades, to the beginnings of the Mara Salvatrucha gang. Even though all MS-13 members are from El Salvador and Honduras, this criminal organization actually started out in the barrios of Los Angeles during the 1980s. You see, a horrible civil war was ravaging El Salvador, and many of its inhabitants fled the bloodshed. It was in LA that El Salvador immigrants met other immigrants from Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico. Soon, they formed the Mara Salvatrucha. Mara is slang for gang. Salva stands for El Salvador, and Trucha means street smart. What about the 13? One theory says it's just the position of the letter M in the alphabet. Another theory takes it a little bit further.
13 being a number of what they said was evil. They really enjoyed this idea of them being close to the devil. They loved this idea of heavy metal and satanic worship.
Sometimes gangs like these begin as a way to protect the community against other gangs, but the MS-13 was never a peaceful community of Hispanic immigrants watching each other's backs. They soon got a reputation for extreme violence and machete murders. Yes, machete murders.
They're readily available, they're cheap, and they shear an image of terror into their rivals. The thought of being cut in gruesome ways by machetes is a psychological weapon.
According to the FBI, the MS-13 gang is now spread to 46 states. In 2012, the U.S. Treasury designated the gang a transnational criminal organization. It was the first street gang to receive the dubious honor, placing it alongside much larger international cartels like Mexican Zetas, Japanese Yakuza, and Italian Camorra. The MS-13 was also dubbed America's most notorious gang. Here's a dark twist. The MS-13 stays incredibly brutal by recruiting poor, vulnerable teens from backgrounds of petty crime or narcotics addiction.
I was going on 13 years old the first time I took a life. And I see about 6 people kneeling down. Then the individual, the person in charge, and they start laughing. And I think they saw that scared, panicked look in my face and asked me if I had ever killed somebody.
It's heartbreaking to think so many teens end up in places like MS-13 instead of getting the help and support they need to overcome their tough childhood. And to join the MS-13, no matter your age, you're required to be jumped in, aka subjected to a vicious 13-second beat. Then there's getting wet, carrying out a crime, usually a murder for the gang.
He pulled out a handgun, told me to kill that person, the one kneeling in front of him.
Sadly, it's very hard for MS-13 members to quit. They're branded for life with huge tattoos on their chest, and so if they ever flee, they can easily be found, identified, and killed. And you don't want to get killed by the MS-13.
MS-13 is particularly violent. They don't like shooting people because it's too quick, it's too fast.
The MS-13 took shape in LA during a time of gang turmoil. In the first years, many MS-13 members wore long hair and went to heavy metal concerts.
If you think of music like AC/DC or Iron Maiden, very heavy guitar, heavy drums, and that's what brought them together.
But when they discovered all gangs in the city were at war, they took violence to the next level. After all, most MS-13 members had just fled their home country, which was a 24/7 war zone. They were used to extreme violence. No gang could compete with the Mara Salvatrucha when it came to brutality. And as they asserted their dominance over Los Angeles, they spread out to other cities, then to other states.
As they spread, they get into more and more trouble. They get jailed more often and even deported more often.
So now MS-13 started forming in El Salvador and Honduras too.
One story that really caught our attention today came from Immigration and Customs Enforcement. In the past year, that agency says it has deported nearly 400,000 people. That's a record.
And prison was a perfect place to recruit more violent people into the gang. If you have a knack for senseless violence, you're perfect for Mara Salvatrucha. There's something that makes MS-13 stand out from other criminal organizations. The MS-13 is not a drug cartel. In fact, there have only been a few leaders or members who tried entering the drug trade, but they all ended up in prison or dead, and no one in Mara Salvatrucha got to the kingpin level. Still, they are very good at something else.
This organization, more than being a mafia, is kind of a rudimentary social club, a very loosely knit network of people who have a shared identity.
What's their shared identity, you ask?
Collective violence against others and collective violence against themselves.
They came from a place of war, so that's what unites them. In a sad and ironic twist, they fled a war only to return and keep it going to this day.
Efectivamente, el país está viviendo una situación de guerra y ese lenguaje las pandillas lo entienden muy bien.
Mata, y esa es la que tiene la guerra con la policía, la que está matando a la policía.
There are 6 million people in El Salvador, and 1 murder an hour. Also, 1 in 12 people in the country has ties to the gang or their livelihood depends on it. The MS-13 are fighting their rivals, the 18th Street Gang, or Barrio 18, and they're fighting the police. As it turns out, the police are using the same tactic when it comes to these gangs: kill on sight.
Buena parte de los homicidios, y el gobierno lo reconoce, los comete la policía.
We're at the Central Criminal Courts for San Salvador. That's these buildings, and then over there behind us there's the morgue. And that's really the 2 ways out for an awful lot of gang members. They're either brought here and then go on to jail, or they're brought here dead.
In El Salvador prisons, MS-13 members run the show. In fact, the wardens and guards don't even come in anymore.
So powerful are these inmates that it was them and not the warders who granted us permission to enter.
In US prisons, it's not the same. Gangs have less control. Still, MS-13 prison gangs are as strong as ever, and there's a small gang cell in almost every prison in the country. Sadly, when you come out of prison, there isn't really a chance to put that life behind you. Once you're branded an MS-13 member, you have to go back to the criminal ways as soon as you get out. Even the founder of Mara Salvatrucha wasn't granted a clean slate. Ernesto Miranda, aka Smokey, started out as a soldier in the bloody Civil War in the 1980s. Then he fled to Los Angeles, where he found himself in the middle of street, so he rallied fellow El Salvador immigrants and founded the MS-13. Smokey was one of the people who raised the MS-13 gang into international threat status, from drug trafficking to prostitution, weapons stealing, and murder. He did it all. Of course, this got the FBI's attention. In 2004, he was deported to El Salvador. Initially, it seemed like a clean slate for Smokey. He began studying law and started a family. With a young daughter living under his roof, Smokey even became preoccupied with keeping vulnerable teens out of the MS-13's hands. But age 38, Smokey was brutally killed, simply because he turned down an invitation to a fellow MS-13 member's prison release party. A senseless death explained only by the brutality he'd once imbued his sicarios with. To this day, brutal murders happen on a daily basis at the hands of MS-13 members, both in Central America and in the US. In 2017, a woman known as La Diablita, or the Little Devil, came into the spotlight. Lanez Escobar looks petite and innocent, but we would be mistaken to assume she can't be a cold-blooded killer. 5 boys had posted themselves making gang signs on social media. They were just having a bit of drunken fun. They weren't part of any gang. But to the MS-13 gang, this was a sign of rival gang members. They associated the boys with rivals and they wanted them removed. Lanez was just a teenager when she started working for the MS-13 on Long Island. She was also the girlfriend of an MS-13 soldier, so she wanted to prove herself and do the initiation. Remember what that was? That's right, getting wet or murdering someone for the gang. Lanez lured the boys to a park where several MS-13 members ambushed them. Lanez and a few others hacked boys with machetes. Only 1 of the 5 survived. He recalls a blood-chilling night, under a full moon, running for my life, chased by gangsters shouting, "Hack him." Indeed, machete murder is still a thing for the Mara Salvatruchas. Lanez Escobar was eventually arrested and charged with murder, conspiracy to commit murder, aid of racketeering, and racketeering. She was still underage when she was charged. Shockingly, La Diablita pleaded not guilty, but on April 11, 2022, there was a verdict.
Right now at 5:30, a verdict today for a young woman accused of luring 4 men to their deaths at the hands of MS-13 gang members.
Lanez was found guilty of all charges. She will possibly spend the rest of her life behind bars, but her family wants everyone to know Lanez is the typical MS-13 tragic story. She was a vulnerable teen from an early age and pushed to become ever more brutal to prove herself.
That she was a young girl who had a difficult life, not having a father, not having a mother, abused physically, mentally.
It's sad to know that some MS-13's deadliest hitmen or women come from terrible backgrounds where violence was all they knew. It's even sadder that some of these people end up mass murderers, spreading more pain and suffering than they ever endured. Enter Edenilson Velasquez Larin. On June 7, 2023, a state patrol trooper in Sandusky Township, Ohio, stopped a car for tailgating.
Thank you. Salvador. Okay, gotcha.
This was a routine stop. The officer had no idea who was in the car. As it turns out, 33-year-old Edenilson Velasquez Larin was in the front passenger seat next to 26-year-old Gabriel Lopez, who was driving, a 31-year-old Bianca Garcia, who was Edenilson's fiance.
How you doing? Doing all right? Is this a rental car?
Yes.
Okay, did you rent it?
I rent it.
Okay, do you have the rental agreement on you?
Yeah.
The trooper realized Bianca was answering all his questions and figured out there was a language barrier between him and the two men.
Does he not speak any English? No. Okay. Well, the reason I got him stopped is because he's following too close. I'm not going to issue him a citation. It's just going to be a warning.
Bianca told the officer that the group was traveling from Colorado to New York to visit her family. She worked at Amazon in Denver, but she had grown up in New York.
Are you originally from the United States, or?
Yes.
Oh, okay. How about these guys? How do you know these guys?
He's my fiance.
Okay.
It's his cousin.
Oh, okay.
The trooper seemed friendly, but he was also interested in the two men. Clearly, they were from El Salvador. He'd seen their IDs. And as he ran their IDs through the system, he asked if they had any work visas.
Like a work visa, or?
¿Tiene alguna visa para trabajar?
No. Okay.
It almost sounds like the group will be good to go in a minute. But after the trooper went to his car with Edenilson's ID, he returned accompanied by a Border Patrol agent.
This agent wants to speak to you. He's going to have you step out, okay?
Edenilson acted like the officer was only speaking to Lopez, but he had no choice.
I'll have you come out here real quick. Any weapons on you, anything? Pistoles?
No, not
Can I pat you down real quick?
Edenilson was taken straight to the police car. It would later be revealed that Edenilson was an international MS-13 leader. He had ordered several murders and committed many other brutal acts against rival gang members.
Information tonight on an alleged international gang leader locked up now in Lucas County. As we have reported, this man, Edenlinson Velasquez Larin, is locked up in Toledo tonight.
Edenilson was sought in a federal murder conspiracy. The leader of the MS-13 gang, Edenilson Velasquez Larin, along with dozens of other members of the gang, has been indicted and charged by the FBI on Wednesday. Although New York was the center of the violence, people thought to be connected with the crimes were arrested this week in places including New Jersey, North Carolina, and Virginia. As it turns out, Edenilson was the United States MS-13 leader. He was a pretty big name. No wonder why it didn't take long for the trooper to arrest him after running his ID through the system. Edenilson is nothing short of a serial killer. In some of the gruesome murders, he participated actively. One especially gut-wrenching story involves him and his MS-13 members murdering a 17-year-old, then posing with his body. The victim was subjected to stabbing and strangulation, and the perpetrators later posed for pictures with the victim, adding to the heinousness of the act. He also beat an 18-year-old to death after luring him to a baseball field with the promise of weed. Both victims are thought to have been a part of the 18th Street Gang. These murders were happening between 2019 and 2020 during a turf fight in Long Island between the two gangs. Another boy was almost killed after he was slashed with machetes on his back and head. Through nothing short of a miracle, he escaped and survived. And in September 2020, a man sitting in his parked car in Queens was shot in front of his wife and young children. The list goes on. Edenilson confessed to 3 murders, but he's thought to have ordered many, many more. The FBI is struggling to keep up with the actual number of corpses the MS-13 leave behind. Today, Edenilson is in isolation at a maximum security section of Toledo jail. Unlike his cooperative demeanor in the body cam footage, he is said to have a huge propensity for violence. So much so that he's required to be escorted by at least 2 jailers when moved around. He is facing a certain life sentence. With the boss in prison, we could be hopeful and think the days of the MS-13's brutality are over. But the Marta Salvatrucha has been around since the 1980s, and violence only seems on the rise. Unfortunately, their very identity is centered around violence, and whoever comes next to the throne is likely to have the same approach. Today, few MS-13 members make a living from the drug trade. Instead, they extort everyone in their area.
And the people that they're extorting more often than not are their neighbors, are the local shopkeepers, the local mechanics, the most vulnerable populations.
It's even sadder when you think these are usually members of their community. Their whole discourse becomes hypocritical. How can you say your gang brings your community together when you're extorting and terrorizing other people from your community? In the eyes of the MS-13, violence was the only way from the get-go. It's the only thing they were ever exposed to.
You're coming from
At 7 years old, I used to find every time I used to go buy bread early in the morning, I used to find a lot of suckers decapitated by La Guardia.
By the police.
Imagine what this does to a child's brain. Another ex-MS-13 hitman, Juan, spoke about the brutal things he had done for the gang. When he was 18, he was forced to kill his first person in his initiation. One time, Juan killed 3 people, then watched his fellow sicarios dismember them brutally. The sight was so horrifying that something clicked inside his mind. He couldn't take it anymore. That's when he decided to flee Honduras, knowing the MS-13 would be on his tail for the rest of his life. Under a hidden identity and wearing lots of camouflage, Juan then talked to the media, spreading the word about the horrific crimes of MS-13 hitmen. I saw one. They had cut the person into tiny pieces and put them in a box. MS-13 cuts them into 13 pieces. It's their symbol. I only heard the screams and all that, and how they killed them. It was so that people would know. What he revealed is simply stomach-turning, murder, rape, torture, and filming it to post it online. Just like the brutal Jalisco New Generation cartel, the MS-13 makes a point out of spreading fear and panic. This way, they let rival gang members know they are not to be messed with. And you want to know MS-13's motto? Kill, control. Yeah. In 2017, MS-13 made international headlines twice. First with the murder of 2 teenage girls. They were walking through their neighborhood in New York when they were butchered with a machete and a baseball bat after a minor dispute with a MS-13 hitman. The same month, 3 teenage girls in Houston were kidnapped, violated, and shot fatally. 2 MS-13 hitmen, Miguel Alvarez Flores and Diego Hernandez Rivera, were arrested for this. During their court hearing, they laughed, waved at the cameras, and showed complete defiance towards authority. Not just that, but it was clear that they had zero remorse for their horrific crime. This had nothing to do with the MS-13's illicit business or turf fights. It was brutality for brutality's sake, an enactment of the gang's terrifying motto. And this was just in the US. In El Salvador, no one can even count the murders. According to Juan, El Salvador has the highest femicide rate in the world simply because MS-13. They prey on women and children, those most vulnerable to brutal attacks. Sometimes hitmen will burn a whole bus in broad daylight or put an entire family inside their home. With a culture like this, it's hard to see how the Mara Salvatrucha can ever change for the better. And with a history of brutal violence and machete killing, it's also hard to see how they can ever be reduced to silence. Hey, thanks for watching. What do you think about the MS-13 gang? Do you know other related stories? Let me know in a comment. And before you go, why not like, subscribe, and hit that bell button? On to next time.